The northern camera goes offline at 3:40. Scheduled maintenance, 15 minutes, standard. The security log shows nothing unusual in the 4 hours before. No perimeter alerts, no fence contact sensors triggered, no anomalous movement in any of the monitored interior zones. The reserve is quiet. The reserve is always quiet at 0340. And when the camera comes back online at 0355, the thermal overlay shows grass and trees and the feeding station and the eastern water point and the interior patrol routes that have been walked every night for 14 months. It shows all of that. What it does not show is Romulus, or Remus, or Khaleesi. The researcher on the overnight shift checks the overlay twice. She checks the interior camera network zone by zone. She pulls up the fence sensor log for the last 6 hours. Nothing triggered, nothing flagged. Nothing that explains why 2,000 acres of monitored reserve is showing 0 thermal signatures for 3 animals that each weigh over 90 pounds. She picks up the radio, and she says 4 words that end the first chapter of this story and open something nobody in that building has a protocol for. They are not inside. Part 1. How it happened. The fence is 10 feet tall, zoo-grade galvanized steel, set in concrete footings sunk 4 feet into the ground. It has never been tested by the animals inside it in any way that suggested structural compromise. No contact, no pressure, no indication in 14 months of monitoring that any of the 3 animals had identified it as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a boundary to be respected. But respected is the wrong word. And the behavioral data from the previous 3 months, the data that documented Romulus mapping the camera maintenance schedule, Khaleesi timing the shift change gaps, Remus studying the geometry of the entry gate from the inside. That data was telling anyone willing to read it in the right direction what was actually happening. They were not respecting the fence. They were reading it. The same way they read the cameras, the same way they read the handlers. Building a model of the system, testing its edges with careful, low-commitment probes that never triggered the sensors because they were never designed to trigger them. They were designed to determine where the system's attention was not. The fence sensor network monitors contact and pressure across the full perimeter. What it does not monitor is the ground beneath the concrete footings in the northeast corner of the reserve, where a seasonal drainage channel runs within 4 meters of the fence line. The channel is dry 9 months of the year. In the wet season, it runs shallow and fast, and over decades, it has undercut the soil beneath the northeast footing by approximately 11 inches on the channel-facing side. The footing is structurally sound. The fence has not moved, but the gap between the bottom of the fence and the ground on the channel side, in the specific location where the drainage has undercut the soil, is 14 inches at its widest point. 14 inches is not enough for a 90-pound wolf to pass through without effort. It is enough for a wolf that has identified the location, assessed the gap, and is willing to compress and rotate and move through it with the kind of deliberate physical commitment that takes practice. The ground on the channel side of that footing shows marks consistent with repeated low-pressure contact over several weeks. Not recent, weeks. The northeast corner is outside the coverage arc of the northern camera during its standard operational orientation. It falls into the maintenance gap zone that Romulus began approaching 4 weeks ago and stopped approaching the day the maintenance schedule was randomized. He did not stop because the randomized schedule defeated him. He stopped approaching the northern perimeter from the interior because he had already found what he was looking for. He stopped needing to check. At some point between 0325 and 0340, while the northern camera was still online and oriented away from the northeast corner, 3 animals that had spent 14 months learning exactly this system used exactly this gap and moved from inside the fence to outside it without triggering a single sensor. The fence did not fail. They read it, and when they had finished reading it, they walked through the one sentence in it they had been looking for. Part 2. The first 24 hours. What they find. It is 0400, and they are outside. The immediate landscape around the reserve is mixed grassland and low scrub. Ranching country. The nearest town is 11 miles northeast. The nearest significant forest cover is a river corridor 7 miles southwest. The air is cool and still and full of information that the reserve, managed and fed and monitored, never provided in the same density. Scent. Real scent. Not the recycled familiar scent of a managed 2,000-acre enclosure where the same animals have been moving the same routes for 14 months. The outside world is an olfactory environment of a completely different order. Deer, cattle, coyote trails, water. The specific chemical signatures of vegetation that has not been managed, and prey animals that have not been tracked, and a landscape that does not know they are in it yet. The deer population in the surrounding area has not encountered a dire wolf in 12,500 years, which means it has not encountered a dire wolf ever in any evolutionary time frame that matters to its current behavioral programming. It knows coyotes, it knows mountain lions. Its flight responses, its alert distances, its terrain preferences when threatened are calibrated to those specific predator signatures. The dire wolf is not in its threat library, not in its scent memory, not in the behavioral responses its nervous system knows how to trigger. The first deer that detects Romulus at 40 meters does what deer do when they detect something unfamiliar that does not match a known threat profile. It hesitates. It tries to categorize. And in the gap between detection and classification, between something is there and this is what it is and this is what I do, Romulus closes 20 meters in a time that the deer's hesitation did not budget for. The first hunt takes 11 minutes. It is not clean. The technique is rough in the way that any first application of learned theory to real conditions is rough, but it is successful. And the 3 animals that have been fed twice daily at a managed station for 14 months eat something they caught themselves for the first time, in the dark, outside the fence, 11 miles from the nearest human settlement. By dawn, they are 7 miles from the reserve, moving southwest toward the river corridor. Moving together, not scattered, not panicked. Together and directional in a way that suggests the movement is not random. That the river corridor, which they cannot have visited before, is a destination rather than a direction. They are following water scent, which is normal predator behavior. But the specific line they are following, the most direct route to the river corridor that avoids the open, exposed ground near the ranch infrastructure to the east, is not the line that random water following produces. It is the line that something produces when it has already processed the landscape information available to it and selected the optimal route before moving. They have been outside the fence for 4 hours. They are already navigating. Part 3. The response failure. At 0412, the Colossal Operations Center begins making calls. The first call is to the senior behavioral researcher. The second is to the CEO. The third is to the company's legal team. The fourth call, the one to the relevant state wildlife authority, does not happen until 0447, because the operations team spends 35 minutes trying to determine which agency has jurisdiction over 3 animals that are not listed as a protected species under any existing framework and are legally the property of a private company, but are physically outside that company's controlled environment and moving through public and private land. The answer they arrive at is not clean, because the clean answer does not exist. The legal vacuum that the previous script established as a theoretical problem is now a 0447 operational crisis with 3 90-pound animals 7 miles from the reserve and moving. The State Wildlife Authority receives the call and immediately faces the same jurisdictional question from the other side. Their mandate covers native wildlife and introduced species under specific statutory categories. The dire wolf is not native wildlife in any living legal sense. It is not an introduced species because it was not introduced. It escaped from private property, which makes it a livestock escape situation under one reading of the statute and an exotic animal escape situation under
another, and an entirely novel category of event under a third reading that nobody on the overnight shift at the State Wildlife Authority is prepared to adjudicate at 0447 on a Tuesday morning. The first field team does not deploy until 0623, 2 hours and 11 minutes after the initial alert. With tranquilizer equipment rated for animals up to 150 pounds, which is adequate for the current size of Romulus and Remus, but represents a margin that is closer than anyone is comfortable with, and with a tracking protocol designed for predators that follow reactive movement patterns.
The behavioral researcher who documented the camera maintenance behavior is on the phone with the field team leader at 0631, trying to explain why the standard tracking model is the wrong tool for this specific situation. She is explaining that these animals do not follow reactive movement patterns, that they anticipate rather than react, that the standard protocol assumes a predator responding to stimuli, and these animals have demonstrated consistent behavior that suggests they are modeling stimuli before responding to them. The field team leader listens, and then does what field team leaders do at 6:31. With 3 escaped animals 11 miles from a town, he deploys the standard protocol. Because it is the protocol he has, and because the alternative, which is to design a new tracking methodology for a cognitive profile that has no established precedent, is not something that happens between a phone call and a field deployment on a Tuesday morning. Part 4. What the cognitive variable does. By 0900, the field team has established a search perimeter based on predicted movement from the last confirmed position. River corridor, 7 miles southwest of the reserve. The prediction is based on the standard model. Predator in unfamiliar territory follows the path of least resistance toward food, water, and cover, moves in expanding arcs from the initial escape point, is findable within the predicted zone with reasonable confidence given standard tracking methodology. Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi are not in the predicted zone. They crossed the river corridor at approximately 0530, drank, and continued southwest rather than settling in the cover the model predicted they would use. The model predicted settling because settling is what predators in unfamiliar territory do when they find adequate cover and water. It reduces exposure. It allows assessment of the new environment before committing to further movement. They did not settle. They kept moving. Southwest and slightly south, away from the human activity signature that the Eastern Ranch infrastructure produces even at that distance. Away from the road that runs parallel to the river corridor and that carries the first vehicle traffic of the morning at around 600. Toward a larger and less managed landscape that the standard model would not have predicted as a destination because the standard model does not account for a predator that is modeling human activity patterns and routing around them. The field team resets the perimeter at 1100. They are now tracking animals that have covered 18 miles since 0340 and shown no behavioral signature that matches the standard model at any point in that movement. The senior tracker on the team, 22 years of large predator recovery experience, tells the field team leader at 1147 that he has not worked a track that behaved like this, that the movement pattern reads less like an animal in unfamiliar territory and more like an animal that is treating the landscape the same way it treated the reserve, systematically, purposefully, as a system to be read rather than an environment to be reacted to. The field team leader puts this in his situation report. The situation report goes to the operations center. The operations center forwards it to the behavioral research team. And the behavioral researcher who has been trying to explain the cognitive profile since 0631 reads it and writes back 2 sentences. This is what the data predicted. The question is not where they are going. The question is whether they are going somewhere or leading somewhere. Nobody responds to that for 40 minutes. Because nobody is entirely sure what it means. And because the alternative explanation, the one where 3 14-month-old animals that have never been outside a managed reserve are deliberately using movement patterns designed to stay ahead of a response system they have never encountered before, is an explanation that the standard framework for predator cognition does not have room for. But the track does not lie, and the track looks exactly like that explanation. Part 5, 72 hours. At the 72-hour mark, the field team has covered 140 square miles of search area and made 0 confirmed visual contact. 2 ranchers have reported unusual livestock behavior consistent with large predator presence in their area. 1 trail camera on private land 11 miles south of the river corridor has captured a blurred image at 0215 on the second night that the Colossal behavioral team identifies with moderate confidence as Remus, based on body proportions and coat coloration. The image is 23 miles from the reserve, in a direction the initial response perimeter did not extend to because the standard model did not predict movement that far, that fast in that direction. The response is not failing because of lack of effort or resources. It is failing because it was built for a different kind of problem.
Standard large predator recovery assumes an animal that is lost in an unfamiliar environment and behaving according to stress response protocols that experienced trackers know how to read. Increased movement followed by cover seeking, predictable water following, behavioral signatures that narrow the search area over time as the animal's movement becomes more localized. None of those signatures are present. The movement is not stress response movement. It is not lost animal movement. It is purposeful, directional, and consistently oriented away from human activity signatures in ways that require the animal to be reading those signatures in real time and adjusting route accordingly. At the 72-hour briefing, the field team leader presents 3 options. Expand the perimeter and continue standard protocol. Shift to aerial thermal search across the predicted range. Or acknowledge that the behavioral profile of these specific animals may require a fundamentally different approach and request additional time to develop one. The Colossal legal team presents its own assessment simultaneously. The liability exposure of 3 animals with no legal status moving through private land is generating claims from 2 ranchers already. The jurisdictional question has now involved 4 different state and federal agencies, none of which have established authority, and the media, which picked up the story from a scanner intercept at approximately 1400 on day 1, has already produced 47 stories in 18 hours, most of which contain the words dire wolf and escaped in the same sentence, which is producing a public response that the communications team describes as significant and accelerating. And somewhere 23 miles south of the reserve, in terrain that the search perimeter has not reached, 3 animals that learned a 2,000-acre managed reserve in 14 months are learning something considerably larger. Here is the honest answer to the question this video has been building toward. The recapture is the stated objective. It is the right objective. 3 animals without legal status, without established ecological role, without the population size to constitute anything other than a disruption in whatever landscape they enter, need to be recovered. For their safety. For the safety of the ecosystems they are moving through, and because the alternative, 3 apex predators with novel cognitive profiles operating indefinitely in a modern landscape that has no framework for them, is not a stable situation for anyone involved. But the recapture assumes the standard tools work on a non-standard problem, and the 72-hour track record suggests they do not. The field team is chasing animals that are reading the field team the way they read the reserve cameras and the maintenance schedule and the handler movement patterns. The response system is a new environment, and new environments, for Romulus and Remus and Khaleesi, are not obstacles. They are problems to be solved, systems to be read, patterns to be found and used. The most dangerous thing about 3 dire wolves in the modern world was never their teeth. It was never their size. It was the 14 months they spent in a managed environment, learning what humans do before humans do it. That learning does not stop because the environment changed. It accelerates, because the new environment is larger, more complex, and providing more data than the reserve ever did. Somewhere south of the river corridor, in terrain that no camera covers and no perimeter is reached, Romulus is doing what he has been doing since the first weeks of his life. He is watching. He is building the model. And the model is getting more complete every hour. The fence was never the boundary. It was just the first system he finished reading. If the full story of what these 3 animals represent and what their survival changes about everything is what keeps you watching, our last video is the one that maps the consequences. Watch. If these direwolves survive, everything changes next. The legal vacuum, the proof of concept cascade, the conservation paradox, and the question of what the world does when extinction stops being permanent. Everything that made the escape possible started there.